Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are getting into a pretty wild airport standoff. It all started over a flask of water, but it ended with a plane being physically blocked on the tarmac. Now, this isn't just about a celebrity having a bad day. Oh no, this is a story about power, about privilege, and what happens when the system itself is put to the test. So to really get what happened on that tarmac, we have to start with the power behind a single, simple question. It's a phrase you've probably heard a million times, maybe in movies or on TV, but believe me, it is at the absolute heart of this whole thing.
Do you know who I am? You can just hear the arrogance, right? But columnist Udine Ifeanyi says, hold on, it's not just about ego. He thinks it points to something much deeper, a kind of crisis, especially among the country's elite.
And this idea, well, it's not exactly new. Way back in 1899, an economist named Thorstein Veblen talked about a leisure class. You know, people who show off their status not by what they do for a living, but by all the expensive stuff they buy and show off. Ifeanyi draws a straight line from that idea to the modern big man culture, where your whole identity is tied up in your visible wealth and who you know.
And this quote? It just nails Ifeanyi's whole argument. He's basically saying that if you strip away the fancy cars, the big titles, the powerful friends, there's just this profound emptiness left. So that question, do you know who I am? It's a threat, for sure, but it's also kind of weirdly a desperate cry for someone to say, yes, you matter.
So how does this so-called deep emptiness actually play out in the real world? Well, let's head to the tarmac at Abuja's International Airport and get into the case of the famous Fuji musician Wasiu Ayinde, who most people know as KWAM. Okay, so things escalated fast. It all kicked off with a basic security rule. You know, the 100 ml liquid limit we've all known about since 9/11. But from there, it just spiraled. He refuses to follow the rule. Then he allegedly assaults the crew by pouring the liquid on them. And then it goes to a whole other level. He physically stands in front of the airplane, blocking it on an active tarmac. Just wow. So, after all the chaos, two very different stories emerged. On one hand, the musicians team put out an apology, but they claimed the flask just had water for a medical issue, chronic dehydration. The airline story, on the other hand, was way simpler. A passenger refused to follow critical, very standard safety rules, period. Now, an incident this public, and frankly, this reckless, it just couldn't be ignored. The aviation authorities had to get involved, and they acted pretty swiftly. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, or the NCAA, stepped in right away. While they conduct a full investigation, they put the musician on a no-fly list. No domestic flights, no international flights for 6 months. But wait, the consequences didn't just stop with him. The flight crew, they also faced some serious heat for powering up the plane's engines while there was still people on the tarmac, which is a huge safety no-no. Both the pilot, Captain Oluranti Ogoyi, and the co-pilot had their licenses suspended too. And right here is where the story blows up into something much bigger than just one guy's actions. This single chaotic moment basically yanked the curtain back on some major systemic problems in Nigeria's whole aviation industry, and even its justice system. The response looks even more interesting when you compare it to what happens elsewhere. The Punch editorial board pointed out a case in the US where 2 passengers just threw coffee at an agent, and they were arrested and prosecuted for battery. So it really makes you wonder, for something as dangerous as blocking an airplane, is a 6-month ban and an apology really enough? I mean, it begs a pretty basic question. How could this even happen? An incident like this just shines a huge spotlight on some critical security gaps. How does a passenger even get onto an active tarmac to begin with? It points to things like weak security, a lack of basic infrastructure like air bridges, and it really raises some tough questions about whether the rules are being applied the same way for everybody. And that brings us right back to where we started, to this whole idea of the big man and the culture of impunity that can sometimes go along with it. The Punch editorial board makes this really fascinating point about a double standard. You'll see the same powerful people who might act like they're above the law at home, and then they're perfectly behaved when they travel abroad. And the reason is pretty simple, right? It's the expectation that in other places, the law will be applied to you no matter who you are.
So in the end, we're left with this one critical question. Was all that chaos on the tarmac just about one person's moment of failure, or was it a symptom of a much bigger problem? A culture where asking, "Do you know who I am?" isn't just an arrogant question, but an actual expectation that the rules are about to change for you. Thanks for joining The Explainer.